All right, hello and welcome to another edition of Facebook and YouTube Live here with East Central ISD. My name is Brandon Oliver, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at ECISD. And tonight we're going to be talking about special education, special needs, and how what to do if you suspect your child uh, does have a disability. So I'm going to bring on right now my guests, and they are the experts without question here at East Central. And we have Shane Shelton, licensed specialist in school psychology, and Lauren Reese, speech pathologist. Shane and Lauren, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon, for having us.
All right, so this is an interesting topic. If you're suspecting that your child may have a disability, um, how often do y'all encounter this? Um, where a parent in East Central does say, I think I am suspecting something. I think, my child might have a disability.
Well, and I mean, we both work together. We've worked together in the district. This is my ninth year. And we've worked closely to collaborate with parents, with teachers for students that, parents or teachers might have concerns about a disability, whether that would impact their speech and language, which in the case of Miss Reese, she would be the expert on. But there's other areas that disabilities can impact, academics, social emotional functioning, self-care, adaptive behavior. It kind of runs the gamut. And so that's basically what we do on an everyday basis, having those conversations and working with school staff and parents to talk about those concerns and help them through the process.
All right, so let's go in and get to it. I'll bring up your presentation there on screen, and I'll let you guys roll with it.
Okay. Did you want to start?
Sure. Okay, so today we're talking about child find. And what child find is the child find is the affirmative, ongoing process of public awareness, coordination with agencies and primary sources, and screening procedures that locate, identify, and evaluate all children with disabilities from birth through 21 who may require early intervention or special education services. So what that basically means is child find is locating children who may have disabilities and identifying them and evaluating those children, and it runs, like they're saying, from birth through age 21. And so we're going to talk about that today and what that looks like prior to children being school age and when they are school age.
Right. And the process does, like as Ms. Reese said, kind of look a little bit different depending on the age of the student. But we kind of want to walk through the different pieces of it and hopefully, look at it from the legal standpoint and what the law says, but kind of try to break it down so that it's a little bit more understandable for parents. And I know it's a very big process, and we just want to help maybe talk through some of that and explain it a little bit. Let me see it. Can I click?
Yeah.
Like that? Okay.
All right. So who is covered under child find? Like we said, all children ages birth through 21 residing in the state of Texas, including children who are enrolled in public schools, and that includes virtual schools, who are attending either private schools or home schools, who may be homeless or highly mobile, children who are wards of the state or in foster care, children that are military connected. So I think what that means is they may move around from state to state or out of the country from base to base. Children who are involved in the criminal justice system, and children who are residing in nursing homes.
Mm-hmm. And so really, it kind of gets to the point that, the school districts, our school district, as one of the many local education agencies in Texas, are responsible for the students that reside in our boundaries, and ensuring that we are being very proactive and helping identify students that might qualify for special education services, that might have a need for those special education services, and to give parents the information and the options about what those services could entail. Oh, it does. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about law, and just because this is where it all kind of stems from, I don't want to spend too much time talking, specifically about, the legal standpoints, but I do want to talk about a little bit the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. IDEA is a law that makes available a free and appropriate public education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation and ensures special education and related services to those children. So the special education program really works under, the provisions, of IDEA. And everything that we kind of talk about kind of stems from this piece of it. Go to the next one. I do want to also talk a little bit about Section 504. Because these are two different but sometimes kind of interlinked programs. So Section 504 is actually based off of a couple of different laws, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which basically kind of guarantees certain protections to people with disabilities. Section 504 protects people with physical or mental impairment that can substantially limit a major life activity. And so some of those you see on the screen can be things like walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, working. I try to think of 504 as kind of a broader umbrella that covers students with disabilities, that basically ensures that there's equal access to educational services. And so some of the things that can be provided through 504 could be classroom accommodations, so that students with disabilities are just able to access their education in the same way as non-disabled peers. Some students with disabilities might not have needs that kind of go into a more narrow umbrella that special education or IDEA represents. Those students that we'll kind of get into a little bit further under special education, would have to meet eligibility criteria as a student with a disability and display a need for specially designed instruction. And we'll talk, at greater length about what that means and what that looks like. But just knowing that there's two types of programs for students with disabilities, and that they can both be utilized to support students at different times. Sometimes students are served under 504 and other students are served under special education, but that is essentially the difference between those two programs. Oh, and there was a little bit of a slide here that had a little bit more information about eligibility for Section 504. We'll talk a little bit about the process for being evaluated for special education, but there's also an evaluation process that works under 504, as well as subsequent meetings between school district and parents to outline what some of those supports and accommodations could look like through 504. We're going to transition back to talking about students under IDEA, and starting with those students that are ages 0 to 3.
So if you suspect that your child ages 0 through 3 may have a disability, you would turn to early child intervention. So what early childhood intervention is the Texas Health and Human Resources is actually the lead state agency for ECI. The following services are provided with no out-of-pocket payment from the parent. They provide child find just like the school district does, including the assessment and development of an individualized family service plan. Early childhood intervention, ECI, is actually, it's under IDEA. It's called IDEA Part C. They may serve children with a medical diagnosis from the doctor, with a developmental delay, such as a communication delay or fine and gross motor skills delay. They may receive services from an occupational therapist or a physical therapist, a speech pathologist, with personal or social skills delays. They may have a sensory impairment, such as being deaf or hard of hearing, visual impairments, or deaf blindness.
And so both of myself and Ms. Reese actually work, we are a part of the early childhood assessment team. And so part of our responsibility this school year has been interacting with the different agencies that provide early childhood intervention services to those students that are age 0 to almost 3, so before they turn 3. And they do very good work in providing supports for students that, as we kind of mentioned before, might have areas of delay or areas of need. Some of the things that they can look to provide if there's a need there include specialized skills training to work on skill development for areas of delay, speech therapy, occupational therapy, those sorts of things. And that really kind of provides those students that are part of this program some of those really key early intervention supports so that they can hopefully close some of those gaps. And then when it comes to time to transition, which is what we're going to talk about next, we look at coordinating that handoff between ECI and what the LEA, which is the local education agency. So East Central ISD in this particular case.
So when the child is about to turn 3, who's receiving ECI services at least 90 days prior to their 3rd birthday, there'll be a meeting between ECI and the school district. And we'll be discussing we'll meet to discuss if the student may display with a disability. If the school district does suspect a disability, we may sign consents to have an evaluation. If the student does meet eligibility criteria as a student with a disability by their 3rd birthday, we'll have an ARD meeting and they'll be able to start services by their 3rd birthday, depending, and those services can vary depending on the recommendations of the assessment team.
Yeah, and so that kind of specifically deals with students that are receiving early childhood intervention services, but for parents that have concerns about their child's development that maybe weren't receiving early childhood interventions, and maybe they're already 3 or maybe they just turned 4. We also have a mechanism for fielding parent concerns. Reaching out to our central office, our special education central office, to coordinate and to interface with parents that have concerns and potentially suspect that a student has a disability, even at that young an age. And so even if they aren't coming from ECI, if a parent expresses concerns or has a suspicion of a disability, then we'll make contact with the parent, hear about what the concerns are, and schedule a meeting to talk about those concerns. And as Ms. Reese said, if there is a suspicion of disability, then we can look at potentially moving forward with an evaluation. So there's different kind of ways of going about things. We talked a little bit about ECI, but there's also that mechanism for younger students, even if they aren't receiving early childhood intervention services. Right.
Okay. So the school district and IDEA Part B, like we were saying, the ECI was the Part C part of IDEA, and we're considered Part B. And we serve students ages 3 to 21 years old. We offer a free and appropriate public education. We offer special education and related services to children with disabilities, and an individualized education program. So who can make a referral for special education? So if the child's parent or legal guardian has a concern that their child may have a disability, they can make a referral to for special education services. School personnel can make referrals, and any other person that's involved in the education or care of the student. If a parent, let's see, can you go to the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If a parent does make a written request or a verbal request for an initial evaluation for special education services, the LEA must respond no later than 15 school days after receiving the request. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Right. And so if a parent has a concern, a request for an evaluation in writing, then the school, as Ms. Reese said, has 15 school days to respond. And so we will either respond with a prior written notice, which is a term that basically outlines, or it describes the process of outlining the things that we're proposing to do for the child, which, if we are suspecting a disability, would be proposing an evaluation and moving forward from there and describing the evaluation and gaining consent from the parent. Or if, based off the information that we collect, we aren't suspecting a disability and a need for special education services, then we might issue a prior written notice that indicates that we aren't moving forward with an evaluation, and to collect the data that indicates, why we're not suspecting an evaluation at this time, and then potentially some of the things that we would like to do to address any of the concerns that the parent has in the meantime. The purpose of that 15-day school period is really to provide the district and those that are working within the program to reach out to classroom teachers, to reach out to the parent, and to really collect a lot of data regarding the concerns that are raised, whether it's raised, by a parent, or in the case, of a referral through, through the school, potentially by a teacher or someone else. But we really want to make a concerted effort to collect and utilize data to make the decisions that we need to make for that child. Database decision making is extremely important when we get to the process of actually going through the evaluation and talking about that itself. We'll talk about a lot of what that data looks like, but data collection, even just at the point of referral, is really important. So if there's concerns regarding the student's language and how they're communicating and how they're talking to other people, the speech pathologist might reach out to the parent and to the classroom teacher and to gather some more information about what those concerns look like. If there's concerns about the student's reading ability or their writing ability, we're going to collect those work samples. We're going to talk with the teacher and talk with the parent to hear about what those concerns look like. We're going to try to pull different sources of data, not just their grades, but looking at work samples, looking at their history of interventions, if they've been in tier interventions, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But all of those pieces are considered because ultimately it would either point to the suspicion of a disability, or we would need to in turn follow up on that and seek consent, or potentially not pointing to the suspicion of a disability or a need for services, and then going out and taking the correct course of action in that aspect. So there's a lot of different components to that, but that's kind of the purpose of the referral process and having that time frame to collect that information. Let me see. I was going to talk a little bit.
I think we go to
That was the next slide?
Next slide.
Okay. I was trying to see. Okay.
So prior to a referral, students that are having trouble in Gen Ed classroom should be considered for all support services available that are available to all the students in general education, such as tutorial services, remedial services, compensatory services, multi-tiered systems of support services, and Mr. Shelton will speak more to that, and accommodations under 504. There is an emphasis, as Mr. Shelton was saying, on making data-based decisions. Knowledge or suspicion of a disability does not automatically trigger the need to refer for a special education evaluation.
So yeah, it's that kind of two-pronged piece that we need to make sure there is the suspicion of a disability or knowledge of a disability, but also because of that disability or the suspicion of that disability, there's a need for specially designed instruction or special education services. And so it's both of those pieces together. And Ms. Reese referred to the multi-tiered systems of support, so MTSS. We do have throughout the district, from elementary through the upper levels, different interventions and levels of support that are available through the general education program. Students that might have more difficulty or are a little bit behind in reading or in math, or they might even need some supports with regards to their behavioral functioning or their social emotional functioning. We have mechanisms that are built in to help provide those supports for those students. And what that potentially could look like would be tier interventions within the general education classroom and small group instruction, potentially to target those areas of reading difficulty if a student is identified with having some difficulty in certain areas. The students go through different screening processes and take different district benchmarks or district assessments that help identify students that are potentially presenting with greater needs in those areas, so that we can identify those students and start to address some of those concerns in a systematic manner, using research-based interventions, and to closely progress monitor their progress. Essentially what that means is that, if a student is really showing that they're having difficulties with, learning math calculation skills for single-digit addition, then, they're going to come up with an intervention strategy and a plan for providing some extra support during tier instruction for that student, and tracking how the student progresses or doesn't progress. Students that have difficulty progressing, even with some of these supports, it builds that the data that we're trying to collect to see that a student is not being successful in the classroom, and then might potentially indicate the presence of a disability. But I wanted to kind of outline all of these different supports, because there are so many different levels of interventions and strategies that we're doing, some of them within the general education program, and some of them through special education to support our students. And it's really about trying to find the right combination of supports and services for these students, so that we can correctly identify students that do have disabilities and provide them the needs that they or provide them the services that they might need, but then to also not over provide or I guess make sure that students are also being instructed in as less or as least a restrictive environment as possible. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into special education a little bit deeper, but that's always a conscious effort on our part.
And this we kind of already, I think Mr. Shelton already kind of touched on this.
I jumped in.
Got excited, jumped ahead. But like Mr. Shelton said earlier, the school must inform the child's parents in writing if it does propose to evaluate the child for possible special education eligibility or services. The prior written notice will be given, and that will include the steps the district either proposes or refuses to take at that time. And the child find does not, like we were saying, does not require schools to agree to conduct a full and individual initial evaluation for every child, but we do consider it. And if we're refusing at that time, we give our reasons that we're not suspecting a disability and what our recommendations are at that time. Okay, so there's 2 questions to answer when referring a child to special education. Is there a reason to suspect a disability? And is there a reason to suspect that because of that potential disability, the student needs special education and or related services? I'm going to speak more to that.
Yeah, and I'll actually get into the areas of disability on the next slide, and I can kind of talk about this. And so under IDEA and through the Texas Education Code, for students that are between the ages of 3 and 21, there are 13 different disability categories, and you can see them here. They range from students with autism to students that are deaf or hard of hearing or have deaf blindness, students with an emotional disturbance or an intellectual disability. or a speech impairment or a specific learning disability. And what I want to I guess emphasize with this slide is that our students that are in special education, or students with disabilities, have a wide range of needs, but also strengths and abilities. And there are many different categories that a student might qualify under. Some students might meet more than one disability, or one might be identified under multiple disability categories. And the purpose of the evaluation, and really the referral before the evaluation, is to look at, are we suspecting that a student might have a disability in one or more of these areas? And if so, there is that suspicion, then crafting an evaluation and a plan for evaluating that student that's very targeted and purposeful, while still, covering the breadth and depth of what needs to be covered in terms of appropriately identifying all of the needs that educationally that student might have. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going into, let me see, the different areas of eligibility. Here's I'm describing it. Let me see.
Pages 17 through 19.
Oh, that's so fun. Yeah. I'll just go into the next one. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the areas, and this is kind of where I'll spend a little time talking about one of the areas of disability under IDEA, which is a specific learning disability and dyslexia. I know this is a bit of a hotter topic, especially this year, but I wanted to kind of talk specifically about this because there has been a little bit of a shift in how dyslexia is evaluated in the schools. And so moving forward, if you go through and you look at the dyslexia handbook and how dyslexia is defined, it's very specifically stated, even through TA, that dyslexia is a very specific type of learning disability, a learning disability that primarily impacts their students' reading and their spelling. And there's certain characteristics of dyslexia that we look at as far as their difficulty reading words in isolation, having that difficulty accurately decoding unfamiliar words, having difficulty with oral reading. So the rate or their fluency with which how they read is slow and accurate or labored, and having those difficulties with spelling. And so the evaluation of dyslexia presently is treated the same way as any other IDEA eligible disability category in terms of the referral process. So if there's a suspicion that a student might have dyslexia, or there's concerns for dyslexia, the referral process would primarily go through the process that we were kind of describing for special education, in terms of identification. And where that kind of comes in from the IDEA side of things is a specific learning disability is basically the student is showing what we call a pattern of strengths and weaknesses, and shows that they have specific areas of their cognitive functioning that impact specific areas of academic weakness. And so a student that would qualify for dyslexia would qualify under specific learning disability, most likely in the areas of basic reading or reading fluency. And so the evaluation for dyslexia would look at both the IDEA determination for a specific learning disability and consideration of a co-occurrent condition of dyslexia.
Do you want to talk? So we just got a really sweet comment.
Oh.
Brandon, can you put Emily's comment on the screen?
Oh, it's up there. It's up there.
Okay.
Okay. So
Read it.
thank you, Emily. She said, you guys help both of my kids. Both are enrolled at UTSA pursuing degrees in engineering. Thank you.
Aw,
And that's so
that's sweet.
sweet. It makes us so happy. And I'm so proud that your kids are doing well.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
That makes me happy. It's always good to hear from parents and hear how our kiddos are doing, because ultimately what we want for students in special education, what we want for all students is the same thing. We want all of them to be successful, and special education is really just the program with which students with disabilities, we're providing them the supports and the things that they need to be successful, because they are very capable, and they can do great and wonderful things with the right supports. And that's what we both got into special education, to make sure that we're hopefully helping those students get the supports that they need. So thank you. I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover. Yeah, so just looking at making sure we're conducting a comprehensive evaluation to include the consideration for a specific learning disability, and again, with a co-occurring condition of dyslexia, if that's the... So I can look at the, there's not specifically a minimum age. I know there's a question from Melissa. So the handbook doesn't specify that there needs to be a certain age or grade level that we would look at evaluating for dyslexia. It's really looking at the different characteristics that might come about, even in kindergarten or first grade. Certainly, you want to consider too, the history potentially of reading difficulties in the classroom. But I think an important piece is looking at having the opportunities to have those provisions for instruction, basic reading skills, learning the letters, the letter sounds, learning how to blend, how to segment, and how to put some of those pieces together. And so sometimes at such an early age, when they're still learning some of those pieces, it can be more difficult to kind of tease that apart. But certainly, if there's initial concerns, that you have with, how a student is picking up on some of these early phonological awareness skills, that can be a conversation that you have with your teacher and kind of going on from there. Let's see.
Okay.
We got another one there from Vicky. Another question.
Okay, let's see, Vicky, and that's a speech question. I'll address that. So we have, so it sounds like, Vicky, you may have, you may suspect that your son may have a speech impairment, maybe in the area of fluency or stuttering. You can let his teacher know that you have a concern, and they will bring it up to the MTSS committee, and also to the speech pathologist who is part of that committee, and they will address your concerns. Okay.
And looks like we have a follow-up from Melissa as well. She expressed concern, but was told that kids are not usually tested until at least 7th or 2nd grade.
Well, and like I said, I'm not gonna say that there's a specific grade that a student would have to be evaluated for dyslexia. I think, again, going back to my previous comments, a lot of times it can be difficult to tease out with younger students that are still learning the foundational pieces of instruction and not given that time for that remediation. And so it probably would just be more of a conversation with the teacher and that particular campus regarding what those concerns look like, just depending on his or her history of instruction and types of interventions he's been getting in the classroom. So do you want to?
All right. So thank you guys very much for your presentation.
Oh, we're not
done.
You're not done? Oh my gosh. All right. Well, let me pop it back up there then.
We still got lots to go.
There we go. There we go.
Okay. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about what the our responsibilities are for the local education agency, and kind of go into a little bit more detail about the process of evaluation. Once we kind of got into the point of referral and kind of talking through those questions, and then we'll kind of get into more of what that part looks like moving forward.
So these are the responsibilities of the local education agency or your schools. To develop a written local policies and operating procedures to engage in public and parent guardian awareness activities, like we're doing right now, notifying parents by providing the right to information statement annually, conducting school-wide screenings, ensuring appropriate and timely referrals for evaluation, and we discussed that that 15 school days is that considered the appropriate time for a oh well, that's when there's a parent referral. That's not. But if there is a suspected disability, to ensure appropriate and timely referral for the evaluation. Coordinating with other agencies, including early childhood interventions, and we spoke to that earlier. Maintaining and report accurate data, and providing training and professional development to all staff. Do you have anything you want to elaborate on that
on the
one?
next page.
Okay.
We'll kind of get into some of these other pieces. I'll go on to the next slide.
Okay.
And I kind of talked a little bit about this, so I kind of jumped the gun too, but the different types of screenings that are conducted throughout, through the different grade levels. And so there is a concerted effort to make sure that we are looking at, students functioning and their development in a number of different areas as early as pre-kindergarten, using different district assessments and benchmarks just to make sure that students are achieving to, where they need to be. Okay. And so then the other part that was really kind of on that part of the LEA responsibilities talks about ensuring appropriate and timely referrals and evaluations. So we're going to talk a little bit about what a comprehensive evaluation looks like. And so, as we mentioned before, in a full and individual evaluation for a child, a lot of these pieces are considered and assessed along with the areas of suspected disability as appropriate. And so all of these pieces are considered within the evaluation due to the suspected disability. Certain areas might be addressed more formally. So for instance, if we are suspecting that a student might have a speech or language impairment, the area of communicative status, which is typically evaluated when it's formally assessed for a speech impairment by a speech pathologist, that would be more formal. And so that would involve the speech pathologist. I don't want to speak for you, so you can talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Right. So that would involve the speech pathologist giving formal assessments, and also along with informal observations, and that could look like speech and language samples. But that area would be if there was a suspected disability in the area of speech and language, the communicative status would be evaluated by the speech pathologist.
Where you look at the student's health functioning or their present health conditions and their development. Some students might have medical diagnoses or health conditions that might significantly impact their educational progress. And for those students, we try to work closely with that child's physician to make sure that we're getting input from that physician to appropriately document and the child's medical conditions and their specific impact on their education, to work closely with the parent about what potentially the impact of that health condition can be for that child within the home setting or even within the school setting. A lot of times we'll have collaboration with the school nurse too, if they are involved with the care of that child. So there's that piece. Vision and hearing is a very important piece. We do vision and hearing screenings for our students within in the district to ensure that that they're seeing okay, that they don't need glasses or anything like that, because that can definitely impact their ability to learn and benefit from instruction in the classroom, or that they have difficulties with hearing. And so those are things that we want to consider as part of the evaluation. We look at students' motor functioning. Some students, we look at their functionality within the educational setting. Some students might have significant needs that might require an evaluation by a school-based occupational therapist or a physical therapist, so that they can work on goals and have supports to help them with regards to their fine or gross motor functioning. We look at a student's social and emotional status. That includes things such as their behavioral regulation, their emotional responses, their anything that kind of falls under anxiety or depression. That could be within that realm of the evaluation, and then general intelligence and academic performance. General intelligence being those cognitive or thinking skills, their problem-solving ability, their memory, their processing, really kind of how their brain is kind of functioning, and the academic piece being all of the things that they're using all of those cognitive skills to perform. So your reading, your math, your writing, and what that looks like. Again, some of these areas might be informally assessed, and we just collect information from the classroom teacher, from the child, from the parent. But in other cases, these areas are going to be more formally assessed, and it really just depends on that, the areas of suspected disability, which gets back to the importance of having really good information at the time of referral, and making sure that we're including all party members in that process from the beginning.
Okay. And right now, we wanted to kind of talk about what it looks like, the timelines of from the time we get consents from the parent for the evaluation. We have 45 school days to complete the evaluation. And that gives us time to gather data, to do our observations, to do our formal assessments and the informal assessments, and create the report to determine if the child does have a disability, and make our recommendations for what we're recommending in the school for him or her. So from the time we write or the report is completed, we have 30 calendar days to have the ARD meeting, the ARD meeting, and that stands for admission, review, dismissal. The first meeting, if the student does have a disability and a need for special education, and they're being admitted into special education, that would be the admission ARD. Every year we come together to review their progress, and to make recommendations for new goals and accommodations, and that would be the review ARD. And then when they're ready for dismissal from special education, that would be considered their dismissal ARD.
And so a part of that, and I think it's going to be on another slide, right? Who's part of the ARD committee? Oh, okay. I don't want to jump the gun, but this is, I guess, I like this diagram because it kind of helps show or illustrate the kind of flow of the process. And I know sometimes there can be a little bit of frustration with the process and the length of time, but really, the Texas Education Code and the law, talks about those 45 school days, and it's really, necessary from an evaluator standpoint, because there's so much that goes into an evaluation. When I was going over the different areas that we look at, and I can go back to this previous slide that kind of talks a little bit about the parts of the evaluation and what that consists of in a little bit more detail. There's a lot of components that we have to look at, and a lot of things that we have to consider. And an evaluation really should be looking at the history of that child's instruction, and all of the different factors that potentially can be impacting that student educationally, because we have to rule out any other factors that might, be primarily the cause for that student's difficulties, whether that's their difficulties in, with behavior, or with academics, or academic achievement, or things like that. And it does include as I mentioned before, information about the child's academic development and functional performance. We make very concerted efforts to identify this, student's native language, and making sure that we're evaluating that child in the student's native language, or to have consideration about language dominance for students that might come from, households or that don't speak, English as a primary language, or are exposed to multiple languages. That we're using measures that are norm referenced, or that are conducted in a way that are unbiased, and so not discriminative against the child. And the measures that we're using are valid and reliable. So they are measuring the things that we intend for them to measure, and can be repeated, with knowing that they're going to have the same types of results each time. And so that all that is to say is that, the 45 school days can feel lengthy, but it really is, set up to and designed so that we are providing that child with the best evaluation that we can give them, because it's really important for them. It's important for accurately identifying a student with a disability and accurately identifying their needs, so that we can appropriately provide the supports and interventions that they would need to be successful. Let me see. Oh, and then we go on. So we were going to talk about art committee members and kind of what that looks like.
Sure. Okay. So we were discussing what the ARD was earlier, and ARD is at the ARD there will be a committee that makes decisions. The ARD committee members include the parent, an LEA representative, and that may be like principal or assistant principal. It could be a special ed facilitator. You'll have the general education teacher there, a special education teacher or provider. Let's see, an interpreter of the instructional implications of evaluation results. So that would be the assessment staff, and other people may be there, other providers of maybe other therapists. The parent can bring others to the meetings, and if so, just please you can let your special ed facilitator know prior to the meeting who to expect at the meeting. Speak more to that.
Yeah. Let me see. I was trying to make a point. I was thinking something. But really, yeah, it's really a collaborative effort, and really wanting to include all of these committee members, because these are supposed to represent people that are that have, they have a stake in the child's, instruction, first and foremost, the parent. And I always encourage parents, whether it's, their initial evaluation where they're considering special education services and being initiated for the first time, or, they've been in special education for a number of years. It's always great to have that parent's input, to hear their concerns, to have their feedback, that they are an active and vital member of the ARD committee. And so when we are going through and discussing their present levels of performance, does that sound like your child? Does that make sense with what you've been seeing? Have you seen that same amount of growth that we're seeing based off of this data that we're seeing here? Are they still having difficulties with that? You mentioned last year that they were having difficulty in this area. We want to make sure that we're addressing all of those concerns, that when we talk about the goals that we're proposing for the student, those goals are based on the student's present levels and their needs, based again back on the evaluation that we talked about. But do those goals make sense to you? Or do you have any questions about how that goal will be monitored, or anything like that? Because I think every question is a good one, and a lot of times it can feel intimidating or daunting, especially for those that are new to the process and new to all of the paperwork and all of the faces and the people, and now the shift to, you know, doing a lot of things more, you know, virtual as opposed to in person. But really, we're all there, and what we want to do is have a really honest, detailed conversation about the child with the parent, and make sure that when we leave that meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, that we're leaving with uh, an individualized education plan that really represents that student, and that we know is going to be successful. And that starts with, you know, everyone. So.
Well said. Okay, so we're going to discuss the review of existing evaluation data, or READ. So once a child is in special education, they may they've already had their full and individual initial evaluation. If more data is needed more than a year after that evaluation, a read may take place. At least every 3 years, a read may take place. And what a read, and it's basically looking at the prior evaluation data and then discussing how the student is doing currently, and to discuss a reevaluation. So a reevaluation involves, oops, sorry.
That was my bad.
A reevaluation involves a read, as like I said, as well as current input from a student's parent, the student's teachers, so that a decision can be made regarding continued eligibility or need for further information. A reevaluation, like I said, must be conducted not more often than once a year, unless the parent and LEAA agree otherwise, and at least every 3 years. Unless the LEA and the parent agree that the reevaluation isn't necessary at that time. A read is required as part of any reevaluation.
All right. And so they essentially, and I don't know if you get onto this in the next screen, but the purpose of a reevaluation meeting is to, you know, once a child is in special education, because we utilize this child's evaluation primarily as the first source of information for how, you know, how a student is eligible for special education and what kind of services they might need. When we have ARDs, we're always collecting additional information and data that's not necessarily reflected in that evaluation per se, but we're, again, getting back to the importance of data-based decision making, utilizing a lot of that information to make those decisions. And so the I guess responsibility is that at the very least every 3 years we're coming back and looking at, you know, what did the previous evaluation show? Let's summarize what the findings were. What are we seeing, you know, in the subsequent time since that evaluation? Let's update everything. Let's you know, talk about how the child is doing with regards to their speech and language, or with regards to their reading or their math ability presently. And based on that, we look at these 4 different questions that we want to answer when we are going through the reevaluation process.
Okay. So based on the read, the team must identify any additional data that's needed to determine whether the student continues to have a disability, whether the student continues to need special education and or related services. We look at the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, the CLAFs of the students, and related developmental needs of the student, and whether any additions or modifications to the special education and related services are needed to enable that the student meets the measurable annual goals set out in his or her IEP, and to participate as appropriate in the general education curriculum. Add a read if there is, so if your student is currently in special education, has a disability, and either the parent or the staff or someone else involved in the child's life may suspect that they have another disability, a read may take place to look into that. Do you want to discuss that a little? bit more. That seems to happen more on your level than
Right.
than with a speech pathologist.
Well,
Mhm.
let me see. Which part was that again? Sorry, I was reading this.
Just so what can happen is so a child's already in special education. Maybe a teacher suspects that they're receiving speech services. They're just identified as a student with a speech impairment, and the teacher may suspect that the child has a learning disability, or dyslexia, or
And so and really, if
disability.
it kind of gets back to a lot of the things that we talked about for an initial referral. And so when a child is already in special education, that still doesn't necessarily negate the fact that we need to collect that information and collect the group of people together. And that's really ultimately the purpose of having the read, is so that let's say a child with a speech impairment has really been struggling with their reading for a while, and they've been getting interventions and they're still not making progress, and we're coming to the point where we are suspecting potentially another another disability area, that when we come to that read, we have that information that we discussed. So when we talk about going and talking about how Johnny might be doing with his reading now, well, we have a lot of that information about what interventions he's been getting, what his reading instructions look like, what his reading level has been in terms of his growth from beginning of year to middle of year. What does his map, his measures of academic progress, as a district benchmark that we use, what do his scores show there, or his M-class scores, and really using that as kind of the talk, or the launching point for a discussion about the suspicion of another area of eligibility. And so within that meeting, we'll discuss those concerns, and if we are suspecting another disability, as we kind of talked about in that on that slide, we can go ahead and request additional assessment in certain areas to confirm if there truly is a disability that we need to be addressing for that student. So a lot of it looks a little bit similar to the initial process, but it's kind of working within the boundaries of the framework that we have already established in special education. So a lot of the same members that are going to be a part of that decision-making process, and ultimately coming together to request that additional testing if it's needed.
Thank you for clearing that up. Okay, so that is bringing us to the end of our presentation. That was it.
Okay.
I see. I do have
There was a question about
question
expressive language.
about
yes.
the question from MC Trevino: would expressive language disorder qualify as a disability, or for 504? Your son is selective. So expressive language disorder could fall under the disability speech impairment under special education. So that would be considered, that may be considered a disability, like I said, a speech impairment. But let's see, and then we have Rosario Macias.
That's a good question, and I would reach out to either his case manager or his facilitator. We've kind of worked with in the elementary setting, but I want to say that they at times will have meetings or even have discussions about transition for students that we know certain students, obviously that change from going from one campus to another is difficult for a lot of students. But if you have specific concerns about that transition process, being at a new campus, being around new faces, and what that can look like, then I would reach out to the case manager, the facilitator, to have some of those conversations about what things we might be able to consider to help plan for that. There's different things that could be discussed to help potentially alleviate some of the concern, or to maybe slowly introduce that child to a new setting, just depending on that child's specific needs. It could, I don't want to talk about what it could specifically involve, but there's a lot of different options, and we want to make sure that transition can go as smoothly as possible. So I would definitely encourage you to reach out to them and to express those concerns now, so that they can look at planning that more as we get closer to the end of the year, since it's already the time is just flying by with the end of the school year. So yeah, so reach out to the case manager or the facilitator there at Legacy. Okay. Any other questions?
We'll give it a couple more seconds, but now thank you for your presentation.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank
And
you.
it's on time.
I know we weren't. I can't believe we did the whole hour. We were like, oh, I hope we have enough slides and enough information to fill an hour.
I tell you what, it goes by faster than
Okay.
anything.
It does, and there's really there's a lot of different components to it, and there's a lot of information we can talk about. We could probably talk about it endlessly and bore everyone, but I really, the purpose of what we wanted to do today was just try to break some of the basic components of special education, the initial evaluation process, and all of what that looks like down a little bit more so that it's a little bit more understandable. So hopefully we helped with that a little bit today.
All right. Brenda says she's sorry she missed it. She'll watch it later. I'm sure it was great information. And you're right that you can watch this at any time, 24/7, 365. Just take the same links that you took to get here, and you can always go back and watch this important information. And then I believe on your last slide, does it have contact information?
Oh,
Bring
we
it up.
didn't put contact information.
All right. So how can these people get a hold of you?
Okay, so you can reach us through our email, and mine is lauren.rees, R-E-E-S, at ecisd.net. Can we add it to a slide real quick?
I was going to say,
will that
or
work?
you
I
just
don't
like,
think that will work.
I don't know if I can do it because I had to upload it. When I went to the slide on the first page, it has our names there. It's really just our first name dot our last name at ecisd.net. So lauren.rees and shane.shelton at ecisd.net. But yeah, if you have any questions, like I said, we're good resources, but your campus, special education staff, they're great points of contact. They're great resources, as is our district central office, our leadership there. We have a great group of people here in the district.
All right. I think it's time to bring it to a close. Shane and Lauren, thank you so much for your time this evening, and appreciate all the wonderful information. And like we mentioned, you can go back and watch this video at any point. If you miss something, you can go back and check it out. So again, want to thank everybody for watching, and have a good night.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, guys.